The second lesson this morning is taken from the second letter of Paul to his friends in Corinth. We want to prove ourselves genuine servants of God, whatever we may have to go through. Patient endurance of troubles, having to work like slaves, having to go without food or sleep. All this we want to meet with sincerity, with insight and patience, by sheer kindness and genuine love, speaking the plain truth, and living by the power of God. Our sole defense, our only weapon, is a life of integrity, whether we meet honor or dishonor, praise or blame. Called impostors, we must be true. Called nobodies, we must be in the public eye. Never far from death, yet here we are, alive, always going through it, and yet never going under. We know sorrow, yet our joy is inextinguishable. We have nothing to bless ourselves with, yet we bless many others with true riches. We are penniless, yet in reality we have everything worth having. Let us bow for a moment. O God, in the freshness of these new days of the new year, grant us renewed resolve to live for Thee and Thy will. Grant us now moments of receptivity that we may hear a word that will guide and shape and grant life. In the Spirit of Jesus, Amen. Father Andrew Greeley, who is obviously a Chicagoan, described the character of these days, I think, quite accurately. It's that time of year again. The world is full of black and white and gray, and outside it's dirty and wet, and our coats smell like puppies who need baths. We spend long hours inside in a state of boredom, and to cap it off, we come down with some kind of infection. And Christmas seems so long ago we can't even remember it, and Easter is so far away we can't even think about it, and we're a little bit depressed. And we're going to plunge into the new year with such vigor and organization, but already our days are disorderly and overwhelming. What happens to us at this time of year? Students don't want to work. Parents hate their kids moping around, complaining there's never anything to do. Kids hate their parents, telling them to pick up their rooms, take their vitamins. The world of work gets hit too, with more demands on drooping personnel. The heating system is messed up at least once a week. It's just a weird time of year. Half-serious legislator down in Ohio filed a bill, actually, that would have abolished January and February and divided their 60 days up among June, July, and August. It's one way to deal with the problem, a typical governmental way of dealing it, just legislate it out of existence. It occurs to me that the seasons are an appropriate metaphor for life itself, at least in these parts. As a metaphor, it wouldn't make much sense to people living in Tahiti, but like the weather around here, life too has its seasons. The sunny hours when it's easy to move around and simply enjoy. And again, the stormy days when getting anywhere is a risk and challenge, and when the hours turn dark and difficult. The wintry days when the spirit chills to some somber news. The friend who wrote to me to say, "Dear Gil, I'm still in a state of shock. My dear wife Margaret was called to rest very suddenly. I'm a walking zombie." That's winter. As is the pain of a task that drags on, a hope that does not come to fruition, a debilitating body that will not function as it should, the empty space left by a friend gone to some other place, the college admission that does not come through, the lover who no longer loves but leaves, the son or daughter off on a crazy way, the parent who wallows in late life misery. Life's full of winter, full of frustration and reversal and pain and discomfort of both body and mind. And there are the disagreeable tasks that one must force oneself to do over and over again, racking the brain, pushing the body, testing the patience, the seemingly pointless tasks, at least on some days, even the task of grinding out another sermon on a dark gray day. These belong to life's winter season as well. And as seasons are, they are inevitable. Unless we're able to run to the sun, there's not much we can do about them but hunker down and accept. We can turn up the heat, hope the plows will come and the power will not go out, and bundle up as much as we can. The seasons are there. But there is an illusion abroad in the land, the illusion that life can be rid of the dark days, that winter pain and suffering and frustration can be minimized, held at bay, maybe even eradicated. Isn't it true that Americans at times seem like a people on a headlong pursuit of ease and sedation and pain-free existence? Listen to the commercials, tell us to relax and enjoy. A group of friends sitting by the campfire, a clean, clear mountain stream rushing by, a skillet filled with fish, a tub filled with old Milwaukee, and one of the friends says to the others, "Fellows, it doesn't get any better than this." I was talking with a friend, a doctoral candidate at Harvard, and she told of a scholar from England here for a time who marveled that we Americans seem to equate self-worth with being happy. This professor said, so when you're not blissfully happy all the time, you seem to feel that something is wrong with you. Something is very bad with you. So much contemporary culture can be viewed as a flight from pain and inconvenience and frustration and struggling and suffering. Even the hard tasks, learning a language, finding the right mate, are now made easy by the computer. Or if the hard days do fall upon us, the wintry winds force themselves on us, and we can no longer deny them, we conclude, what? That God or fate has singled us out for punishment or bad luck, and we rebel in resentment or anger, and our spirits turn bitter or full of envy for those most fortunate who seem to never have any troubles. We give up on life, so circumscribed and shut in. We assume the experience is a total loss. But actually, we assume that too, our very great loss and impoverishment, because there is another choice, a choice we can make. This most ancient faith, first of all, urges upon us acceptance of the pains and inconvenience and hard discipline and patient endurance and even the uncertainty and anxiety as part of life, as inevitable as wintry weather in Chicago, and to be embraced with courage and hope and faith. I really think one of the most important lessons of life is the inner acceptance that even as in nature, so in our personal days, there will always be a wintry side. James DuPont of the famous family recalls an episode that happened to him when he was 7 years old. He awoke one night out of a sound sleep. His mother was sobbing quite loudly. It was the first time he'd ever heard her cry. Then he heard his father speaking to her. DuPont says, my dad's voice was low and troubled as he tried to comfort Mother, and in their anguish they both forgot about the nearness of my bedroom. I overheard them. While their problem has long since been solved and forgotten, the big discovery I made that night is still with me. Life is not all hearts and flowers. It is hard and cruel much of the time. Now, our faith urges this acceptance upon us, because then our wintry days can take on meaning that they never bear in the warm sunshine of summer, can take on meaning that makes them less painful and more bearable, enables us to find in them even some good, some treasure that we would otherwise not know. Excuse me. For reasons that will become obvious, I've always enjoyed, in this connection, the story of a minister out in New York City by the name of Dr. Garner Brunstein. Climbing a hill on our moped at the end of a beautiful day in Bermuda, we were suddenly slammed to the road by a car. It was going to pass us, but was confronted by another car approaching over the crest of the hill. My wife and I were transported by ambulance to the hospital, where we were treated for our injuries. My leg was broken in 2 places, and the ligaments were ruptured. A full leg cast was put on, and crutches were provided me. We got back to New York in time for me to preach on Sunday. As people were coming to church, I greeted them, as I often do. They asked me what had happened, and when I told them how I'd broken my leg, several of them told me of their own experiences in which they had broken legs, and they sympathized with me. However, one woman looked at me and said, "Well, it could have been worse." A comment I've never found terribly helpful. How could it have been worse, I wanted to know. My leg is fractured in 2 places. The ligaments are torn apart. I have to have this cast for 3 months. I have to sit on a bar stool to preach. How could it have been worse? With a twinkle in her eye, she said, just before I left for the pulpit, "You could have broken your jaw." He comments, "I guess I discovered that the experience had not been all bad after all." Even as there is no explanation for the weather, so there is often no satisfying explanation of the hard spots, the painful parts of life that come. But you know, we can ask what winter does for us, at least around here. Without pressing the metaphor too far, I could note that those who live in colder climes seem to be more resilient and productive. But for certain, it is the winter seasons of life that do grow us. So we want to prove ourselves genuine servants of God, whatever we have to go through. And we want to meet this with sincerity, with insight and patience and kindness, and living by the power of God, always going through it, yet never going under. Always going through it. This is a hard but necessary truth, that none of us would amount to much as human beings, would grow into people of integrity and caring without some measure of struggle and adversity. We do not develop inner resources, learn staying power, generate courage and hope without some effort to survive. That's why I'm always suspicious of educational theories that argue that we should make all education fun. We don't need to go looking for trouble to acknowledge that it has been precisely the hard times in our lives, if you think back, the hard times in our lives until now that have made us what we are this day, that have developed a measure of patience and fortitude and staying power, provided we embrace these difficult days and let them teach us. There's a lovely passage in Chaim Potuk's novel, In the Beginning. All beginnings are hard. I can remember my mother murmuring those words while I lay in bed with fever. Children are often sick, darling. That's the way it is with children. All beginnings are hard. I remember bursting into tears one evening because a passage I had to learn for school proved too difficult for me to understand. I was about 9 at the time. You want to understand everything instantly, my father said, just like that. You only began to study last week. All beginnings are hard. You have to work at the job of studying. Go over it again and again. The man who later guided me in my studies would welcome me warmly into his apartment, and when we sat at his desk, he would say to me in his gentle voice, "Be patient, David. The Midrash says all beginnings are hard. You cannot swallow all the world in 1 hour." Again, like the weather, the wintry times in life, if accepted and embraced, can grow us. And they can grow us toward and for one another. You ever noticed how it is in snowstorms that we get to know our neighbors finally? Or that people seem more willing to go out of their way to help other people in trouble? Even so it is in life, isn't it? Or it can be. If we embrace the pain of life with and for one another, we get to know one another truly. But we seem to have even more difficulty with this kind of winter in our time. Sigrid Linscott writes, about a year ago, our child became suddenly desperately ill. Recovery could not, as one doctor put it, be guaranteed. These days, thank heaven and modern medicine, the illness seems to be abating. Though we can't predict the future, we are hopeful, very hopeful, for the child. I'm not so sure about the rest of us. Perhaps the worst, the most puzzling side effect of this long illness has been the disappearance of some of our friends. After initial expressions of sympathy, they drew back, disappeared, and I'm still trying to understand why. We have unfortunately landed in an upper middle class community where I once believed no one ever dies and women never come outdoors without a painted smile. It seems misery is out of place here. We are not zoned for it. Life together with one another, for one another, does mean the embrace of the wintry side of our days. Love is not easy. It often is exhausting. Janet O'Day writes, "When I was recuperating from surgery, my mother and mother-in-law both offered to help with my very active 2-year-old. My mother came first. 5 exhausting days later, she got in the car with my husband to drive to the airport, where his mother was now due to arrive. 'Where are you going?' a neighbor child asked. In a tired voice, mother answered, 'He's taking a used grandma to the airport and picking up a fresh one.' But if we're available and if we're willing to share the hard times as well as the good times, our relationships take on a quality and depth they would never have if all our times together were simply sunny and easy. Suffering shared is suffering less burdensome and painful, and suffering shared makes our relationships more deep and meaningful. And even more than that, the way we deal with our difficult hours can be the greatest gift that we give to one another in life. Ever occurred to you a major meaning of our life here in this world may be this: the inspiration and strength we provide one another by the way we bear our pain and endure our struggles. The faith and hope with which we embrace our wintry hours can be the greatest gift of our life. A friend of Leslie Weatherhead, the great preacher of London, once wrote to him about his sister, "I wonder if I ever told you what your sister's ministry meant to me. She would be astonished if she knew. I often went to see her during her long illness, and sometimes I even came down from Manchester on purpose. I can never forget my last visit. We had 2 hours together, and she was full of fun and laughter, and I can repeat to this day some of the very words she said. I never knew anyone who more completely and literally ran up with joy the shining way. Her influence has lived on with me down through the years." What a gift in wintry hours. One thing sure, those who've not known pain or trouble or reversal or heartache can do little for those who must face these. There's an old saying that says, "Only wounds can heal wounds." Paul writes to his friends, "We have nothing to bless ourselves with, yet we bless many with true riches." Winter embraced grows us. Winter embraced grows us toward and for one another. And then I think winter embraced grows us toward God. As with the mighty storms of nature over which we have little or no control, so the storms of life lead us to the reality of our dependency upon another, upon a power greater than our own. In fact, in resisting the trials and troubles of life, in denying their reality, we are in fact resisting what God seeks to give us precisely in and through them: the experience of His power in overcoming, the experience of joy in His presence with us, even there. We know sorrow, yet our joy is inextinguishable, writes the apostle. We are penniless, yet in reality we have everything worth having, which is the certainty that on days both sunny and sad, we are in the loving hands of one who rules our future. A Lutheran minister I knew many years ago, I think, faced one of the most wintry times a human being can face. He lost his 18-year-old son by suicide. He did not hide himself away from the world. He did not skirt the terrible questions. He did say, "I cannot begin to describe my grief, nor can I begin to understand what prompted Andrew to do this." But then he went on. Christians are not known for giving up. We are often at our best by the grace of God when everything else is at its worst. When others give up, we go on. For we believe that God still loves the world. We believe that the future is still in God's hands. And because we have this extravagant belief, we will work, and we will pray, and we will hope, and God will be there. In the winter of our pain and trouble, we find ourselves, we find the means of helping one another, and we do find our God. And so we learn the true and deeper joys of life. On the night before he was to die, he held a dinner party with his friends, the celebration of the great feast of freedom of his people. And during the meal, he said to them, "In this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." And then he took the bread and wine of sunny summer days and bound them together with the broken body and shed blood of a wintry tomorrow, as if to remind us that all the seasons of life are in his hands, and therefore we may embrace each one as it comes with a song. Amen.